Tonight on Bridge City News, thanks to the BC wildfires, Alberta Health Services has issued a precautionary air quality warning for our province. Police have released more information on the tragic head-on collision near Jasper, where members of 2 American families were killed. And forget about dogs or cats helping you to de-stress. A company in upstate New York says donkeys are the way to go. We have the details. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Many southern Albertans woke up to a hazy sky today thanks to the wildfires burning in British Columbia. According to Environment Canada, the current air quality is at 6, which is considered moderate. Alberta Health Services issued a precautionary air quality warning for the entire province. The agency is reminding those who have COPD or who are sensitive to smoky air to remain indoors and not to drive with the windows open. Dr. Vivian Sotorp with the AHS explains why vulnerable people should take extra precaution.
People most vulnerable to poor air quality are individuals with underlying lung or heart conditions. And so it could even be asthma or bronchitis or chronic bronchitis, for example, or heart disease. They're often, those lungs and respiratory tracts are more vulnerable to irritants, such as smoky air. The best thing to do is, again, if it's smoky outside, don't go out and exercise. Close your windows if it's really smoky out so that you don't have that outside air. Some of the filtration systems, air filters in houses actually assist with cleaning the air a bit.
Sutorp recommends that families stay indoors middays when it's the hottest, but says swimming is a great option to stay cool. Our reporter Josie Foster checked out Westminster Pool. Josie, what's happening?
Yes, thanks, Hal. I'm just here at Westminster Pool in North Lethbridge. It is a hot, hot day. I'm currently standing in the shade and I'm still sweaty enough that I may end up jumping in. But first, I'm going to go catch up with some of the lifeguards and ask them how they deal with the heat.
It's such an attention-seeking job that your mind is exhausted after regardless, but if you sit in the heat 8 hours, you just want to go to bed and sleep. You're exhausted.
Yeah. With all our staff here, making sure that everyone's well hydrated, making sure they have the sun protection.
We like to sit under the umbrella and like splash water on ourselves a lot. Yeah. Because you walk around and in 5 minutes the water's gone. Yeah. You're dry.
Georgian Tannis are really good.
Yeah.
We always have water and ice.
And they bring ice.
We try and do as much programming as we can for the community. So in the mornings we have lane swim. Kids come down and see that from the community park, and then they want to join in for open swim, which we have every day at noon. We also offer 4 sessions of Red Cross swim lessons. So not only are we providing a good place for the community to come and swim, but we're also providing a safety element where we teach the community water safety and stroke improvement on all that sort of stuff through the Red Cross. We also offer adult type programming, so lane swim, as you can see here. We offer that twice a day, as well as we have Aqua Zumba.
Westminster Pool and the Community Association has always been super supportive with us and has always been very welcoming about our kids coming. As you can imagine, some areas of the world, fresh water, safe water is not always available, and so all of our children absolutely love swimming here.
It's like a really happy, fun environment to work in. It's definitely not stressful. All the groups that come swimming are really kind.
Today was hot, but tomorrow is supposed to be hotter. Another great day to jump in the pool. For Bridge City News, I'm Josie Foster.
That looked like a lot of fun. You know, this is the time of year that HVAC companies are very busy installing or repairing air conditioning units.
Oh, we're real busy right now. Yeah, we've been going pretty hard since about May when we had that kind of first heat wave of the year, and we've been booking installations about 3 weeks out ever since then. You can usually expect an air conditioner to last 20 to 25 years. It's kind of not like your furnace that's running, 9 or 10 months out of the year. The air conditioner is only running 2 to 3 months, 3 months if we're real lucky out of the year, so the lifespan is pretty long on them. You still want to manage the house. Keep the blinds closed as much as you can. Open up the windows in the mornings. Take advantage of some cool morning air. Don't let the house get super hot before you turn the air conditioning on, because your operating costs will really go high that way. Try to maintain more of an even temperature in the house and just let the air conditioner cycle on and off and maintain your house at a nice, comfortable temperature.
The Sage Creek fire in BC has now burned more than 1,100 hectares of land. Fire officials say the southern side is connected with the fuel break from last year's Keno fire. Firefighters are concerned about the hot weather and the challenges it's creating for fire suppression crews. BC and Alberta have now sent 69 firefighters to the scene with 8 helicopters, 1 air tanker, and heavy equipment which is being used to build dozer lines. A logging company employee has died while working at a wildfire in the Nanaimo Lakes area. WorkSafe BC says it's investigating after a Timber West employee was found dead in a vehicle south of the city around 10 o'clock Monday night. Early information suggests the worker was not a firefighter, but making a delivery to the crews who were battling the blaze. The worker's name and age have not yet been released. For the past 2 weeks, a blanket of haze has settled on many parts of California. The smoke has forced summer campers inside and obscured normally bright skylines around Sacramento.
The wildfires and the air quality and lack of good air quality has impacted our camps. We have to keep the kids inside more. A lot of the outdoor physical activities we've had to curtail and cut back on. And it's frustrating because the kids spending more time inside, they get a little bit of cabin fever.
We're just most concerned right now with the wildfire smoke and the particulate matter. So we do encourage people to stay indoors and limit their outside activities.
Red unhealthy, got a little tiny pocket down here of very unhealthy.
Now, the Mendocino complex fires right now are so huge. They're burning over 300,000 acres, and they are contributing the majority of the smoke right now. However, we are still seeing impacts from the Carr fire, which is burning up near Redding, the Ferguson fire, which is burning in the Yosemite Valley area.
So air quality wise, so it limits our outdoor time, which is hard during summer because it's all about being outdoors and using the outdoors to have fun and to play. So we've had to incorporate a lot more indoor activities and developing our program to accommodate the weather.
It's a very good idea to have us stay indoors because sometimes the pollution can make us sick and stuff.
Firefighters from Australia and New Zealand are on the fire front lines in the western United States. They're helping to battle blazes, including the largest wildfire in California history.
Oh, okay.
I came up all the way around.
Oh, yeah, so you're going to go around here? Yeah. No, yeah, we're all operating around here.
Yeah, so there's about 40 New Zealanders and about another 120 Australians here. And so we got a request for help from your federal agencies. And so yeah, we've come out here to A, assist as much as we can, but B, to learn a bit from, you know, the scale of what you do here is amazing. Everything is on a 100 times scale. A big fire in New Zealand would be 50, 60,000 hectares. You know, this thing is massive. And just the number of people involved and the amazing logistics in behind that to make everything happy and move quickly.
We all work collaboratively across the world. You know, we have a good relationship, particularly with America and Canada, and regularly come over here to help, both here and Canada, as well as you know, we have Canadians and Americans and New Zealanders come to Australia regularly when we need that help. So when these big events happen right across the continent, we all pitch in. Oh, it's a significant fire. It's a large fire. It's a lot of resources involved in fighting the fire. But I think positively, everyone is working together on it. It's a great thing to watch all the agencies come together and you know, with a common goal.
Police now say 2 members of a family from Texas and Louisiana were among the 6 victims killed in a head-on crash in Jasper National Park. RCMP say the victims were among 5 family members traveling in a van that hit another vehicle yesterday afternoon about 60 kilometers south of Jasper. Miraculously, a toddler survived with no injuries. No word yet on the identities of the 4 people in the other vehicle who died. 2 were taken to hospital, 1 is in critical condition. The 2 people in a third vehicle that drove off the road to avoid the wreck suffered minor injuries. The RCMP's Major Crimes Unit is investigating the death of a 2-year-old Cardston girl. Police say the young girl was taken to hospital with serious injuries on August 2nd, but then died on Monday from those injuries. An autopsy was completed at the Calgary Medical Examiner's Office on Tuesday of this week. RCMP say they're working with other agencies as the investigation continues. Alberta's police watchdog has cleared a Calgary police officer of any criminal wrongdoing in the fatal shooting death of a 27-year-old woman in 2016. Officers had responded to reports of a woman running toward an apartment with 2 knives and then sprinted towards the police upon their arrival. The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team says one officer yelled at the woman to drop the knives and a second officer fired 2 shots toward the charging woman. The team ruled the shooting was a reasonable use of force. Thanks to a tweet posted by Global Affairs Canada, diplomatic relations are quite tense between Saudi Arabia and Canada. The tweet posted slammed Saudi Arabia's human rights record. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says many view the royal family in Saudi Arabia as being hypocritical at times, but in the end, the family really doesn't care.
The real issue here is that the crown prince and the royal family in general in Saudi Arabia, they have one goal and one goal only, and that is to stay in power. Now, when they speak out about terrorism and then on the other hand fund terrorists, we ask, why the hypocrisy? When they speak about human rights and then suppress human rights, we say, why the hypocrisy? Well, it's because their only goal, again, is to stay in power and not be pushed around by other foreign entities.
Canada's asked the U.S. to help improve diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, but the Americans do not yet want to get involved. Lisa Daftari will have more coming up after business news. Since you can't take it with you when you die, how much money should you plan on leaving behind? Retirement advisor Willis Langford says it's good to leave at least enough to cover your funeral costs so your loved ones are not left with the bill.
How much money should you have left when you die? Well, you want to at least have enough to cover all of your funeral expenses so that you're not a burden to your family or to somebody else. But then how much money should you have when you die? It also becomes, well, how much do you want to leave to your kids or to a charity? So, you know, there are a lot of considerations. Some people say, well, they prefer to die broke, and we have clients that die broke. And basically, you know, $2,500 from CPP, if they were a member of the plan, becomes their funeral expense policy, but you don't get much for $2,500. If we all knew when we were going to die, it would make planning so much easier, but we don't know when we're going to die. I think, you know, having enough cash flow for retirement and then making sure that you fund your lifestyle that you want in retirement, but then using some strategies, having some savings so that you can look after some of those things that are important to you, like how much for funeral coverage, for example, which is going to be more in 30 years than it is today. And then also, what do you want to do? Do you want to leave some to your family, your kids, grandkids, to your church, or to a special charity that you may have?
Donkeys have been used on farms and acreages for many years. As we hear and see in this next report, they're also used to help people de-stress.
Donkeys are smart, not stubborn.
Come on, Clint. Good boy.
They can kick, but they are calm by nature. So says Steve Steyer, keeper of Donkey Park. It's a haven for donkeys and a place to interact with animals that Steyer says are underappreciated.
They're great stress sponges. You can sit down in here and you know, escape your office life, your urban life. We get a lot of people come up from the city, and when they come out, you can just see the stress melting away from them.
The nonprofit park north of New York City is home to 11 full-sized and miniature donkeys and one zebra-donkey mix called a zonkey. The animals travel to schools and nursing homes.
Even walk them a little bit around here.
The small park also hosts groups like this one from a local organization that serves people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Bring this back now and get another. It calms me down, relaxes me.
Donkeys remain work animals in much of the world. Popular culture portrays them as gloomy or as comic relief. They might seem stubborn to some.
Oh.
Steyer says it's a bum rap for a thoughtful animal.
The problem is with donkeys is we expect them as beasts of burden to do what we want them to do. When we call a cat and a cat doesn't come, we don't say stupid, stubborn cat. We just say, oh, that's a cat.
The retired software engineer became fascinated with the animals when his daughter was studying to be a veterinarian.
How are you, Phoebe? Good.
He bought his first donkeys in 2012.
Excellent. Okay.
Good job.
Donkey Park relies on volunteers like Patty Lundgren, who says the animals are gentle.
I figured I might get kicked, because you see the cartoon donkeys kicking. But that hasn't happened to me.
Offering an unlikely type of animal therapy. among the donkeys. Michael Hill, Associated Press, Ulster Park, New York.
De-stressing with donkeys, not a bad idea. The heat warning continues for our region, and tomorrow will be even hotter. In fact, we may even set a record. Complete weather details are coming right up. We had another heat warning in Lethbridge today. Tonight, mainly clear with a low near 18. Tomorrow, we just may see a record. Sunshine and 39 degrees is forecasted. A low-pressure system moves in on Saturday, bringing showers and a high of 30. Even cooler on Sunday with more rain expected and the temperature cooling to 18. A slight chance of showers for Monday with the mercury climbing back up to 21. And Tuesday, sunny and hot once again with a high near 28 expected. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 26 degrees with an average low of 11. The highest temperature in this state was recorded in 2000 at 37 degrees, and the record low was 3 in 2001. Sunrise was at 6:13, sunset at 9:01. Checking tomorrow's forecasted highs across the country, Vancouver had another heat warning today, much the same tomorrow with a high near 26. Just a few clouds and 26 expected in Victoria as well. The air quality advisory issued by Environment Canada continues for Calgary and Edmonton. Calgary will be hazy and 36 tomorrow, Edmonton also smoky and 32. Regina is also seeing its fair share of smoke, much the same picture tomorrow with a high near 35. Saskatoon will be hazy and hot and a high near 33. Winnipeg will have just a few clouds and should get up to 31 degrees tomorrow. Over in the central part of the country, Toronto had rain today. It should clear tomorrow with a daytime high near 26 expected. Ottawa will also be mainly sunny and 25. Montreal will have a clear sky and 26. Fredericton, New Brunswick will have a mixture of sun and cloud and 24. Halifax, Nova Scotia clearing and 25. Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island has a slight chance of showers tomorrow at 23. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, a good chance of rain and a high near 26 is expected. Saudi Arabia's energy minister says the current diplomatic crisis with Canada will not impact oil sales to Canadian consumers. Khalid Al-Falih says there is a long-standing policy that Saudi oil exports are not influenced by politics. About 10% of our country's oil imports come from Saudi Arabia. The kingdom has severed diplomatic ties and frozen all new business with Ottawa over criticism of the arrest of women's rights activists. Federal officials, however, say it's not clear if Saudi banks and pension funds have been ordered to sell off their Canadian assets, as reported earlier this week. Kinder Morgan announced recently that the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline will cost an additional $1.9 billion, and there's also a delay of at least a year before more pipe can be laid. Many believe even though Ottawa bought the pipeline, it may die thanks to a multitude of delays. Alberta MP and Natural Resources Shadow Minister Shannon Stubbs says the Liberals have a history of killing energy contracts.
The Liberals have driven away $100 billion of energy investments and projects that have been cancelled. And to put that in context, which I think is important, the amount of energy investment lost in a 2-year period under the Liberals so far is more than any other comparable 2-year period in more than 70 years, 7 decades.
Catch my entire interview with Alberta MP and Natural Resources Shadow Minister Shannon Stubbs coming up right after business news. Canada's largest farm equipment dealer says it expects fewer sales in the second half of this year. Rocky Mountain Dealerships is blaming higher prices linked to U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum and the lower Canadian dollar. Rocky Mountain says it does not expect to repeat the record level of new equipment sales it posted in the 3 months that ended June 30th. The company says farmers based those purchases of new tractors and combines to last year's bumper crops. CEO Garrett Gandon says rising equipment prices in the United States will likely steer buyers into the used market at the company's dealerships in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. The Canadian Cattlemen's Association remains concerned about uncertainty around NAFTA talks. The beef industry organization says the tariff war with the U.S. is adding even more tension. The association says it continues to work with Canadian officials and U.S. allies to avoid further association of the trade dispute. It says the path forward is murky. On the plus side, the association says its U.S. counterparts strongly support achieving a trade deal and opposes mandatory country of origin labeling. Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the RCMP's Major Crimes Unit is investigating the death of a 2-year-old Cardston girl. Police say the young girl was taken to hospital with serious injuries on August 2nd, but then died on Monday from those injuries. An autopsy was completed at the Calgary Medical Examiner's Office on Tuesday of this week. RCMP say they're working with other agencies as the investigation continues. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. The federal Liberals have a history of cancelling lucrative energy contracts that would have helped Alberta and the rest of Canada. Now that's according to Natural Resources Shadow Minister Shannon Stubbs. Hear more from Ms. Stubbs shortly. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Shakespeare in the Park 2018 season is featuring The Tempest. Take in the final 2 performances this Thursday and Friday at 7 p.m. in Galt Gardens Amphitheatre. This event is free, but donations after the show are gratefully appreciated. For more information, call Kate at 403-329-4568. The Galt Historic Railway Park is offering rides and tours on Saturday, August 18th and Saturday, August 25th from 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Enjoy a tour of the 1890 International Train Station and take a ride on the restored speeder motor car. The Railway Park is located 1 kilometer north of Sterling, Alberta. Tickets are $10 per person and children 10 and under are free. For more details, visit galtrailway.com. The Helen Schuler Nature Center is always looking for energetic individuals to assist them in their day-to-day operations. If you have a keen interest in nature and love sharing it with others, then join the Helen Schuler Nature Center volunteer team. Visit lethbridge.ca/things-to-do/nature center for more information and to apply online. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Like it or not, one of the pillars of Canada's economy is still the natural resource sector. We're talking about oil and gas. Now, we've taken a bit of a hit over the years. Will it turn around anytime soon? Joining me now via Skype is federal Conservative MP from Lakeland, Alberta, northeastern Alberta, Shannon Stubbs, the Shadow Minister of Natural Resources. Welcome to Bridge City News, Shannon.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. Now, the Liberals recently announced some changes to the federal carbon tax program as it relates to heavy industry like steel. It sounds a bit like the government subsidy to offset the impact of the carbon tax. Can you explain what the Liberals are trying to do here?
Well, they aren't solving the problem at all. What they should actually do is repeal the carbon tax, which particularly in the case of energy, no other major oil and gas producing in the country is imposing on themselves because of the damage it would do to their economy's competitiveness. We have yet to see what the Liberals' final changes will be. They are hinting for some major emitters that they would raise the thresholds after which those emitters would have to pay the carbon tax. But that doesn't solve the problem. What they have to do is listen to the advocacy from other provincial governments, from Canadians from all corners of the country, and remove the carbon tax because it will harm the competitiveness of energy, of agriculture, of manufacturing, but also disproportionately harm vulnerable Canadians, low-income Canadians, people on fixed incomes, the working poor, the people who can least afford it. It is one of the measures in a long list of Liberals doing economic harm to Canada's best interests.
You know, many people argue this is designed to ensure that investors aren't scared away by the carbon tax. But where's the money coming from to pay for the subsidy?
Well, the reality is this: the Liberals' policies, legislation, and the combination of their red tape and costs across the board is driving investment out of Canada. That's the real crisis facing Canada's economy right now, is this issue of competitiveness. And so they'll have to unveil the final details of the decision that they do make, and we'll hold them to account on that once we have clarity. But the reality is, particularly in the energy sector, the Liberals have driven away $100 billion of energy investments and projects that have been canceled. And to put that in context, which I think is important, the amount of energy investment lost in a 2-year period under the Liberals so far is more than any other comparable 2-year period in more than 7 decades. So the Liberals, they spin this narrative that the downturn in the energy sector in Canada is because of global factors or global prices, which happen to be right now at 3-year price highs, or external factors. factors beyond the government's control, but that's not the case at all. The collapse of private sector investment confidence in Canada is because of a series of pieces of legislation and policies, and also because of the carbon tax, which will increase the cost of living for everybody, but also particularly for key industries and businesses in energy manufacturing and agriculture.
So Ontario Premier Doug Ford has already said he's going to join forces with Scott Moe and fight the Liberals on this carbon tax. And if Jason Kenney gets in here in Alberta, you could also see another fight. Do you think the Liberals will actually end up scrapping it altogether?
Well, if they believe any of the rhetoric that they ran the last campaign on and continue to spout about, consultation and cooperative federalism and listening to Canadians and working cooperatively with other provincial governments and opposition counterparts. By the way, that was something the Prime Minister said in all of his ministerial mandate letters, that they should de-escalate conflict and work cooperatively. I hope that they do heed that message. Canadians clearly know that it's a cash grab to pay for reckless spending by the Liberals, and I'm glad to see the coalition of provincial governments and Canadians right across the country speaking out against it.
So ever since the cancellation of major projects like Energy East and Northern Gateway Pipeline, has this really caused investors to basically stay away from Canada and invest in other countries?
Yes, it's part of the reason why Kinder Morgan is now trying to get out of their plans to invest $7.4 billion to build the Trans Mountain expansion. But it is also clear in the fact that the energy sector in the United States and in other energy producing countries around the world is booming. Canadian investment in the United States is down 52%. American investment in Canada is up 66%. The United States is already a net exporter of gas and is poised to provide 80% of the world's oil supply in the next 3 years. So the real crisis for Canada that the Liberals have created is that now Canada's #1 energy customer is also a major competitor. And it is clearly a result of the combination of added red tape and costs and anti-energy policies by these Liberals that are driving investment out of Canada and collapsing private sector confidence in our economy.
So where are we at right now then, Shannon, when it comes to Trans Mountain Pipeline? Kinder Morgan says the price tag for twinning the pipeline is now increased $1.9 billion than originally estimated. There's also a 1-year delay in construction.
Right. And in the same way that the Liberals fiddling around with their carbon tax proposals will leave everyday Canadians still on the hook for paying their taxes if they don't repeal it entirely, so too are we asking the Liberals to be accountable about the ultimate cost to taxpayers for the Trans Mountain expansion. When the finance minister announced that expenditure, we warned that that would likely be only the beginning of the costs. I guess those details of the final agreement will be released on August 30th once Kinder Morgan actually votes. But, just in June, I asked the previous Natural Resources Minister if he could even give an estimate about what he thought the ultimate cost to build the expansion would be for taxpayers. He couldn't. The current Natural Resources Minister can't. The news is out yesterday that it looks like it'll be $2 billion more at a minimum. It's already delayed 2 years, and there will be no new pipeline in the ground in 2018. We know that for sure, and the in-service date continues to be completely uncertain. And remember, all of this is also in the context of the failure of the Liberals to find another private sector proponent and backer of the Trans Mountain expansion by the June 22nd deadline, which goes to your point about the fiasco around the Trans Mountain expansion, which is a result of the Prime Minister's failure of leadership being really about the big picture of a lack of confidence of the private sector in Canada's energy sector.
So in your opinion then, what's caused a lot of these delays, and will we expect more of them down the road?
Well, the ongoing delays to the Trans Mountain expansion was a deliberate, coordinated attempt by anti-energy activists to do what they said they would do, which is to use every tool in their toolbox to kill that pipeline through, as they call it, death by delay. And what was astounding was that, first of all, those activists were very clear and very coordinated about that immediately after the federal approval of Trans Mountain, of the expansion 2 years ago. But also as soon as the NDP Green Coalition came to power in BC, And meanwhile, the Prime Minister sat on his hands for a year and a half. It took him a year and a half before he even talked to the new BC Premier about the Trans Mountain expansion at that time. And so in a last-ditch effort, I guess some sort of attempt to save the Trans Mountain expansion, which is the only remaining viable pipeline project still on the table since the Liberals took office, they've announced this major expenditure, but there's still no clarity around cost to taxpayers, the dates for construction, actually accomplishing the expansion.
And like we talked about before, the newly projected costs for the pipeline are, over $2 billion now, more than originally estimated. Now, what are the odds of the number increasing even more as we get closer and closer to potentially twinning this pipeline and starting construction?
Well, I think it's very likely that the cost will continue to increase because of the delays, especially as long as the delays go on. And that is really part of the failure of this expenditure to purchase the existing Trans Mountain expansion, because the barriers to its completion were politically organized and comprised of anti-energy activism and legal challenges and challenges from other levels of government. So the Prime Minister and the Liberals needed to clearly exert federal jurisdiction and enforce the rule of law to ensure that this federally approved pipeline, which is under federal jurisdiction, which is in the national interest, could proceed. So we will be pressing them strongly in the fall when we're back in session to be clear and accountable to Canadians about what will be the cost to taxpayers and exactly what the path forward will be for the Trans Mountain expansion, which ideally is built, paid for, operated, and maintained by the private sector, by pipeline companies, just like the hundreds of thousands of kilometers in pipelines that exist right now in Canada, which have been built with zero tax dollars under the highest standards in the world.
Now, do you think the Liberals will find a buyer for Trans Mountain, or will they possibly decide to keep it because it's making some good money?
Well, it's what strikes me is that it's crazy that we're even having this discussion, or that we even have to have this conjecture about who might be the owner of the Trans Mountain expansion and what the path forward is for the pipeline, because Kinder Morgan planned to invest $7.4 billion in this initiative to the benefit of all of Canada. And it is only because of the failure of the Prime Minister's leadership and the lack of the Liberals to champion the Trans Mountain expansion and work with the proponent to ensure that the conditions were set to be able to go ahead and build it, that we are in this place at all. So it's up to the Liberals to answer those questions to Canadians.
Now, I understand that some First Nations groups are considering buying a stake in Trans Mountain, which is kind of interesting, as we've been hearing that so many Indigenous groups are opposed to the pipeline when in fact there's substantial support.
Absolutely right. That's one thing I'm grateful that is being discussed a lot more in the context of the Trans Mountain expansion. Now, but again, already under Kinder Morgan, the Trans Mountain expansion had $400 million worth of benefit agreements with multiple Indigenous communities. Every single Indigenous community directly crossed and impacted by the Trans Mountain expansion supported the expansion, and 43 communities worked really hard to establish these mutual benefit agreements with Kinder Morgan. So it's a positive thing if Indigenous communities and businesses are looking at being able to invest directly in a stake in a pipeline. But as you point out, the reality is, despite the myth and the narrative from all the anti-energy activists, the vast majority of Indigenous communities in Canada support energy development, they support pipelines, and they were already invested as partners in the Trans Mountain expansion in partnership with Kinder Morgan.
So, Shanna, what would a Conservative government do if you win the election in 2019? And how would you bring back major investment into the natural resource sector?
That will be a number one priority for Canada's Conservatives if we are elected in 2019, because the reality is energy is the number one private sector investor in the Canadian economy. It is Canada's second biggest export. It increases this. It is a major driver of Canada's high standard of living, and it benefits every Canadian, every community, in every corner of the country. And the flight of capital investment out of the energy sector from Canada is a direct result of the combined impact of anti-energy legislation, like the new energy regulations, which cause uncertainty around timeliness and requirements in the approval process, and I'll open the door for even more foreign interference in the review process for energy projects, like the tanker ban that eliminates the ability to export Canadian oil to the Asia Pacific. So Canada's Conservatives, if we are elected in 2019, certainly will have our work cut out for us to restore confidence in private sector investment in the Canadian economy, to repeal unnecessary red tape, to reduce costs, while maintaining the highest environmental standards and the highest track record of socially responsible and environmentally responsible energy production in the world, for which Canada has long been renowned.
Shannon, let's talk a bit about that tweet from Global Affairs Canada attacking Saudi Arabia when it comes to their human rights issues. Now, Saudi Arabia may be saying, you know what, that's it for Canada. You guys are cut off when it comes to oil. How would that impact Canada?
Well, that would be a serious concern on the East Coast, and it invites, I think, a discussion again about the proposal of the nation-building Energy East pipeline, which would have been able to bring Western Canadian crude oil to Eastern Canadian refineries. Eastern Canadian refiners are heavily dependent on both American oil and also foreign oil from Middle Eastern countries, simply because of a lack of cross-country infrastructure to take Western resources for refining in St. John. And so that is real consequences for importing and the use of Canadian oil on the East Coast. But again, in the larger context of the issues that we're talking about, that was an instant where the private sector proponent was ready and willing and dedicated to making a multi-billion-dollar major nation-building infrastructure investment to create thousands of jobs across the country, 15,000 in New Brunswick, and to be able to both secure Canada's energy independence, but also diversify Canada's export markets by shipping to Europe, which is more necessary than ever, given that the U.S. is now our major energy competitor. And TransCanada was forced to abandon Energy East, not because of liberal oil prices and business decisions like the Liberal spin said it was, but as a direct result of the Liberals causing a year and a half of regulatory uncertainty, constant changes, and then imposing a last-minute double standard of upstream and downstream emissions as a condition for pipeline approval, which they don't apply to foreign oil and which isn't applied, frankly, to any other major infrastructure in any other sector across the country. And so while I think what is going on the trade file, not just on this issue, but on a number of issues, shows major failures on the part of the Prime Minister and the Liberal government, at least this may generate again a conversation about working with, again, TransCanada or any private sector proponent who might be willing to come back to the table to propose that nation-building pipeline infrastructure from the west to the east.
So Shannon, you're an MP in Lakeland, Alberta, northeastern Alberta. I'm here in Lethbridge, Alberta, and like we've been discussing, Alberta is heavy in natural resources. What can Alberta do to become that economic powerhouse, that economic engine again that turns Canada?
Well, the key thing will be, I think, as a first step, up to Albertans in the next provincial election, and then as a second step, probably up to Canadians in the next federal election. The reality is that the formula that made Alberta the economic driver of the country to the benefit of all Canadians, and before made Canada an attractive place to do business, are streamlined regulations that accomplish the objectives that all Canadians care about in terms of consultation with impacted communities, consultation with Indigenous communities, the highest environmental standards in the world, and ongoing innovation to continue to produce the most responsible oil and gas on the planet, while also creating the economic conditions through non-punitive taxes and streamlined regulations and rules to attract the private sector investment in the economy. And Alberta has been hit hard by the downturn in the energy sector and the hundreds of thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on it. But the impact in Alberta is dominoing right across the country, and it has an impact in every province. But this is the thing that I hope Albertans and Canadians will know when they go to the polls. It is not a result of external factors or factors that are beyond the control of policymakers and elected representatives in Canada. It is a direct result of policy, legislation, and fiscal frameworks that are driving out business investment, and these are the consequences.
Well, we have two big elections coming up next year, 2019, the Alberta provincial and the federal election. Federal Conservative MP Shannon Stubbs and the Shadow Minister for Natural Resources, thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland says Canada will not back down from its position that led to diplomatic sanctions from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia expelled the Canadian ambassador, halted new trade deals with Canada after the Global Affairs tweet talking about the human rights record and issues when it comes to Saudi Arabia. Now, joining me now via Skype from Los Angeles is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Now, Lisa, that tweet did not go over very well in Saudi Arabia, and Canada's asking allies to help cool the Saudi dispute, but the U.S. is not offering any aid.
No, nobody really wants to get involved here. An interesting situation, and it actually hits home for me as a reporter. This all started with the arrests of the Badawi siblings, Samar and Raif Badawi. Raif Badawi now is a blogger who was arrested in 2014. He was given a 10-year sentence for material that he put on his blog and social media. I broke the story of Raif's imprisonment in 2014, and I have been since in touch with his wife, Ensaf Badawi, who has since moved to Canada and become a Canadian citizen. Ensaf is extremely outspoken and extremely well networked at this point. She moved to Canada in order to get help for her husband's release in Saudi Arabia, and this is what it has culminated into. She has, with the help of Canadian officials, been able to put pressure on the Saudi regime to release Raif and his sister, who has since been arrested as well for her speaking out about her brother's arrest and freedoms in Saudi Arabia. This is a very interesting case because I get asked about Saudi Arabia all the time. On the one hand, Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince go around talking about how they want to talk about the improvements of human conditions in Saudi Arabia. They recently lifted the driving ban for women, have promoted women in sports arenas, going to universities, etc. Now, this sounds very mundane or kind of obvious to us here in the West, but it's not for a culture like Saudi Arabia that has been very much suppressed, particularly regarding women. But I think the real issue here is that the Crown Prince and the royal family in general in Saudi Arabia, they have one goal and one goal only, and that is to stay in power. Now, when they speak out about terrorism and then on the other hand fund terrorists, we ask, why the hypocrisy? When they speak about human rights and then suppress human rights, we say, why the hypocrisy? Well, it's because their only goal, again, is to stay in power and not be pushed around by other foreign entities. So it's okay for the Crown Prince to go around speaking about human rights, but it's never okay for the Crown Prince and the Saudis to be criticized about human rights. And that's how they read the situation now with Canada. And that's what brings us here today. Now, why the U.S. doesn't want to get involved is because the U.S. tiptoes around its frenemy situation with the Saudis, similar to the relationship that the U.S. currently has with Turkey, maybe that exasperating a little bit faster than the one with Saudi Arabia.
But we're talking about a lot of oil here too, right? The Saudi Arabian oil.
Absolutely.
That plays a major role.
Absolutely. So that's exactly where I was getting to, is that we are in a very interest-aligned foreign policy period right now. And when the U.S. could sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, when the U.S. could ask Saudi Arabia to pump extra oil so that the U.S. could put extra pressure on Iran, we need the Saudis. So we're not going to get involved in the Canadian-Saudi row. I'm very sorry, Hal, and all my Canadian friends, because there are some other foreign policy interests at play here. And we're hoping that the Badawi family, the Canadians and the Saudis can work this out. And again, hashtag free Raif. This is a story that I've been working on for a very long time. And truly, when you get to know these families, their children, what they stand for, they've done nothing wrong and they deserve that freedom. They deserve to be released.
You know, it's the power of social media. We've talked about it time and time again, you know. Be careful what you tweet. A devastating earthquake, Lisa, in Indonesia has claimed 98 lives and tourists are fleeing for safety.
Interesting that you say 98. So some reports are saying up to 300, and the country says that the number is much less than that, as we always have this kind of discrepancy, and that death toll is rapidly increasing. The issue here is that the devastation has been so bad, that the damage has been so bad, that the debris on the road is not allowing for trucks with humanitarian aid to get through, obviously causing more that death toll to rise. Hundreds of thousands. I read a report that 165,000 people have left their homes. This is truly devastating. I know here in the West we read about Bali, the most exotic vacation destination, being affected by some of this, but it's truly devastating, and the numbers keep going up, even though Indonesia, I think, is kind of trying to put a damper on that, but it's something to watch.
Now, renewed U.S. sanctions are targeting Iran's economy, and Tehran is not crazy about the talks. Iran's president says Washington first needs to prove that it can be trusted. What does that look like, that trust?
Right. So the officials in Iran are accusing the United States and Donald Trump of illegally withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. Now, again, that nuclear deal was signed under President Obama. It released billions of dollars to the Iranian regime. It signed a contract that would prevent the Iranians from becoming a nuclear power. It has a 10-year sunset clause and a lot of different flaws that experts and politicians believed would not curb Iran's nuclear program, and they felt that they were not behaving according to the tenets of that deal. Now, since the U.S. pulled out of the nuclear deal, which was in May, this week you had snapback sanctions reapplied to the Iranian economy. And as many of you may be following, the Iranian economy is somersaulting so quickly, which is bringing a lot of the Iranians out onto the streets for continued protests against the regime. So the regime has been cornered. So when Donald Trump comes out and says, you know, I will meet with the leader of Iran, President Rouhani, I don't care, I will, I won't, it's because he's cornered, and he's hoping that when the Iranians come to the table, they will come in a way that they will want to concede. Now, I don't think Donald Trump's expecting Rouhani to come to the table. I think Donald Trump's throwing that out there. And I know a lot of critics of that offer said that President Trump said he would meet with the Iranians with no preconditions. And when you look at the situation, the preconditions are the economic sanctions and the situation that the Iranians find themselves in. We're hoping that it will help curb some of the Iranian regime's terror activities in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, Hezbollah, Gaza, etc.
Now, a new report from Reuters suggests that North Korea has not stopped its nuclear and ballistic missile programs despite insistence from U.S. diplomats that talks with North Korea continue. Lisa, could it be that maybe a vicious communist dictator lied to U.S. President Donald Trump?
Perhaps, right? So we don't know many details about this meeting. And I think that a lot of lawmakers on both sides were hoping for more details, more of the timeline going forward. And we're getting some conflicting reports, I think, from the White House as well. Secretary Pompeo is quite skeptical and keeping an eye. I think he's said many times that this will take a while, which makes me think that he knows better, and he knows that what we're seeing doesn't truly match up with what we're hoping to get as an end result with the North Koreans. On the other hand, regionally, you have South Koreans truly concerned about the activity of North Korea and reporting back to the U.S. not to trust the North Koreans about what's going on. And you know, you have this he said, she said kind of situation, more so he said, because we don't have too many women in North Korea calling the shots these days. But I think it's quite important to see that the White House as well is keeping an eye on this, despite the conflicting reports. I don't think anybody is sleeping easily thinking that relations have been normalized between the North Koreans and the rest of the world.
Now, the North Koreans are actually proclaiming a bit of a shift in focus from nuclear arms to economic development, and it's having a bit of an impact. All of a sudden, travel agents in China are seeing a surge in business, and many Chinese want to go visit the North Korean capital city of Pyongyang.
Well, this is a very interesting situation because in history, whenever we have given any kind of economic breathing space along with that diplomatic kind of agreement, we've seen that nation suddenly, the floodgates open. Everyone wants to do business with them. They want to establish those ties again. We saw that with Iran when the money was released, the sanctions were removed. The floodgates open and they're open for business. And I think in this short period of time when that window opened for North Korea to again establish ties with the rest of the world. Now remember how many decades they've been isolated economically and otherwise. They want to open up those relationships. And of course, equal opportunist China is there to save the day and to cash in. That's exactly what we're seeing. And it's something that President Trump campaigned upon before he became president, that he would curb China's behavior from becoming more of this economic monopoly in the region and around the world. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're taking advantage of that opening that we created, really the United States created in North Korea.
Now, Venezuelan authorities said they've arrested 6 people in connection with drone explosions the day before a rally led by President Nicolas Maduro. His critics say Maduro could use the incident as a way to really crack down on those who oppose him. What are you hearing?
Right. Right, as if Maduro needed any more justification for the brutal crackdowns against the opposition. This is more of the same. Unfortunately, though, the one difference this week, I'll tell you, is the assassination attempt on Maduro's life gave him not only a justification to crack down harder at home, but to make the accusation that this was Colombia and to take this conflict and expand it beyond Venezuela's borders. And that's exactly what we were afraid of, this being exported as a way for Maduro to expand his power and what he's looking to do. I am working on a piece actually right now, and I interviewed an expert on this case, someone who is in Argentina right now working on this case. And he said this is exactly what Maduro wants. The rest of the world sees Maduro as this, wants to stay local, wants to keep his power in Venezuela, but he sees it more as a way for Maduro to expand his power throughout the continent of South America. And this is a great opportunity for him to do so, to call out Colombia. And Colombia, remember, has been helping the refugees that have been on the run, really providing a refuge for many of these people who have to escape Venezuela for economic reasons, for political pressure, etc., and giving them a home. Now Maduro is calling out Colombia and really bringing Bogota into the fray.
Back in 2016, Lisa, Hollywood action hero Steven Seagal was presented with a Russian passport by Russian President Vladimir Putin. It was hoped Seagal would improve relations between Russia and the U.S. Now, over the weekend, Russia's foreign minister said he made Seagal its special representative for Russian-U.S. humanitarian efforts to hope to deepen cultural, art, and youth ties between the two countries. But since 2016, U.S. and Russian relations have actually gotten worse, not better.
Definitely gotten worse and not better, and it's leading to a crash course that is not looking too good right now. But nonetheless, I think Putin looks for his friends where he can find them, and he has given this kind of superficial outward appearance that we have a liaison within Hollywood, to normalize relations or to serve as a kind of a go-between between the two nations to better relations. It's interesting. I mean, it's a way for, I think, Putin to get even more publicity if that's possible. He definitely is one to believe that no publicity, any publicity is great publicity. Right. And I think when he kind of summons this former action hero, somebody who probably knows not much about politics, but he is Russian and he is a fan of Donald Trump. He did tweet a very huge congratulations to Donald Trump in January, right before his inauguration. So I think he's looking to kind of plant the seed that he's working towards better relations, that he's looking for the Hollywood crowd to stop, or that kind of liberal left pop culture class in the United States to give him a chance to believe that Putin's the good guy trying to normalize relations with the United States. And when you talk about human conditions and human rights and humanitarian, I mean, these are the buzzwords that a lot of these Hollywood types kind of like to hear. So I think that that's what Putin's up to.
Right. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks a lot, Lisa.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.